red light. So being like success, it's something that we all dream of. Let's just say, sure, like, oh man, to be rich and famous. But then you get that thing, and it's like, how does that not like, think about Justin Bieber, for example. Right?
Okay.
Let's talk about him. Okay.
I mean,
he became famous at such a young age that there's no wonder he's so like he suffered so many psychological adversities, because he never had a chance to be a kid, or at least that's my speculation, right?
So the question of child celebrities and child performers, I mean, that's just like, there's not one of them that comes out okay, right? It's always a struggle.
Justin Timberlake.
Justin Timberlake came out successfully, but he, where in a person's life like that can they know themselves that isn't the celebrity? It's got to be really hard. And so, like, yes, there are people that kind of make it and have career after career after career, like Jason Bateman, right? Justine Bateman wrote a book about how hard it is and how difficult it is to recover from it.
His wife, right?
His sister.
Oh.
They were both on Family Ties.
And he did well, but she had
no. They both did well, but I think she decided not to pursue the career of acting and television and celebrity life so much, and he transitioned into film, and I think he direct now, but he transitioned into film and remade himself. I mean, it was really with it was with Arrested Development that he got his sort of like second coming. Yeah.
Because he's married. Sorry to interrupt. No, I mean, this is crazy. He's married to Paul Anka's daughter.
Oh, is that true? Paul Anka, like the songwriter,
the singer, the Canadian songwriter.
Oh, interesting. There's a funny story about Paul Anka writing the lyrics to My Way. It was like an Italian or French song, maybe an Italian song. That was obviously a beautiful song, and they and some the people that owned it, or some publishers, producers, wanted to make it into an American song, so they shopped it around to different writers. And one of the people that got the song and had the opportunity to try his hand at it was David Bowie. And David Bowie tried to write lyrics for it, and they didn't get chosen. He thought they were pretty good. But then he heard Paul Anka's My Way, and he was like, oh my God, yeah, no wonder. And that was what motivated him to go out and write Life on Mars. Because he was like, I can write a song like that.
I would have thought that's what encouraged him to write Heroes.
Well, history doesn't work that way. But yeah, Heroes was later. I mean, Heroes was much later. And that was while he was living in Berlin, right?
See, what's crazy for me is that music right now, here we go on. Here's my brain unloosed, but the music that I know now is all available right now. I don't have to wait for the amazing songs of the 70s, 80s, 60s. And that's the music that I actually gravitate towards, is not the music so much of now, for my own reasons.
It's partly your age. We were raised on that other music. We were, even you being maybe 10 years younger than me, you might recall classic rock radio being like something that, like, if you were a boy, you had to know that stuff a little bit if you wanted any respect.
If you didn't know sports, you better know classic rock.
That's right.
Or
That's
cars,
exactly.
Or cars.
Yeah, totally.
And I didn't know sports, and I didn't know cars.
Right. Yeah.
So I learned Stairway to Heaven. Not how to play it, but just that music. Anyway,
right. You could identify it. Yeah.
But it's ubiquitous in its availability right now. Whereas
everything is.
I made the mention of Heroes, and it's like, well, Rob, that was a decade later. But to me, it's like, I have no idea when these songs were released in relation.
Right. Yeah. They follow follow on the playlist one after the other. You have no idea what the order is.
Exactly. And there is something to the history, the moment in time when a song is released. You know what I mean? And like Bob Dylan, for example, like they're always like Rolling Stone is the best song of all time. And it's like, I'm sure it is, but where I hear it is dislocated from when it was released. And when it was released was at a time when that song was a punch in the face. Do you know, like just socially and in the world that may be Bob Dylan. Now, when I hear Bob Dylan, I think of his frog voice. He sounds like a frog.
Funny, right? Yeah. I mean, I he's in the upper pantheon for me. And you know, and the more that I got into his stuff beyond the Greatest Hits album, which is how I first really kind of learned about his work, the more I just get blown away. He's genius, and he's the perennial outsider.
Well, he was a civil rights song, like what I'm saying.
Yeah, he was branded that way. Yeah,
but his influence, I didn't understand it when I first heard Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
It's like his like the Beatles or Queen, is that I take it for granted, right? But when those things came out, you know, any Beatles song, it was like, dude, that was huge,
earth-shattering.
Earth-shattering, and not before heard something like that. Now it's like, Let It Be. You know, now I hear that song, it's like, oh, that's a great song. But imagine hearing that song being released the first day.
So yeah, so you know, the entire art and media industry of the 20th century used to have everybody sort of waiting on bated breath for whatever had been advertised to them. So the releases of things had these enormous campaigns, and there was relatively little content that everybody was consuming. And right. So
right, they were gatekeepers of the content.
Yes. Yeah. And so it was a much different ritual, and you know, you'd go to school and everyone would have experienced whatever was on TV last night together. The only thing that's like that now is Sunday night television, which I think started with, like, what is it? 6 Feet Under was the first time that, like, people started to, like, watch television again and go to work or school the next morning, and everyone discussed the same show. And then, you know, that's the Game of Thrones was the sort of, yeah. But so it's different now. Like artists do also struggle to create the campaign for the release of the thing so that hopefully somebody notices.
Yeah, because everybody's doing that.
Yeah, and it's saturation. You know, Arcade Fire has a song called Everything Now. Or no, the album's called Everything, and a song called Everything Now. And there's a tune called Infinite Content. And it's, you know, it's about the irony of having infinite content and no content.
Yeah. Well, it's just who invented the wall of sound, or invented, but came up with that? Was that?
I think there were two. I think there are two versions of the wall of sound. The one that I know about a little bit is the Grateful Dead's version. And it was their guy Owsley, who's the basis of the Jerry Bear, misnamed Jerry Bear, and Owsley was something Owsley the Third, and he was like a chemist and sort of an alchemist, and he was the one that really manufactured all of that LSD that everyone was taking.
Oh, I heard about this guy. Yes.
Right, and his wall of sound was fascinating because each tower of speakers that were built, and there were arrayed speakers next to one another, and each tower of speakers would project a particular wavelength. And so they were dividing the music up in the mixing boards so that, you know, only this wavelength would come through this tower of speakers. And that tower of speakers was the size, the height of the standing wave of that sound. I have no idea what it would have sounded like, but Yeah, they did that for a few tours. It was very expensive apparently, and kind of hard to keep going. But then somebody else did a Wall of Sound. I don't know. I forget which one
Phil
that is.
Spector.
Oh, of course. That's his. It's the approach toward this mixing in the studio
Yes.
and making sure that there's no space.
Yes.
That's different. Yes.
And I think, hear me out here. I'm going to throw this at you. You shoot it down and say, Rob, that's bullshit. But active versus passive listening. I think so much of the music, this is a hasty generalization, a lot of the music that we consume today is very passive. It's just like noise. And maybe I think Phil Spector around that time is it sort of made music the shift from us being active listeners to us being passive listeners, because we're just being inundated. Like at first it's like we have our complete attention, but it's like you get desensitized to things really quickly.
Yeah.
So I wonder if
so you're saying because he saturated the sound, it caused us to be more passive?
It just, I mean,
no, possibly. So usually the way that McLuhan talked about that stuff was to say something was hot or cool.
Yes. Or hypnotic. What is it?
It's all
hypnosis
hypnotic.
Or there's hallucinatory versus hypnotic. He talked.
I haven't heard that division. And I haven't read that stuff, but it's like is it like, to your point, pacifying or activating, right? That's something that Jerry asks, like, and do documentaries activate or do they pacify? And it depends on the documentary, but generally they pacify. I think. I mean, who knows? Maybe they get people to go out to rallies depending on the documentary. But are rallies effective? So I don't know that, but to your question about whether or not the Wall of Sound did that. So McLuhan talked about hot and cold media, and the hot media would activate and the cold media would pacify. But with low fidelity, low definition, you tend to fill in more. So the low definition television screen, you're sort of busy filling in the message, or like a cartoon. You can kind of that idea of like reading into something, an interpretation. You're doing more reading into. And
can I give an example?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry to interject.
Yeah. No.
Star Wars. When Star Wars originally came out, the second one, or apparently the fifth one.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Empire Strikes
Back. At the beginning, he gets captured by that Yeti thing.
Uh-huh.
Okay. In the original, you never see the Yeti. You just see the shadow, and your mind is like, what is this thing? And then they redid it and they showed the monster, and a lot of people are like, dude, that sucks, because what they created in their mind was so much more horrifying. Like, I think you saw the arm fall, but you never saw the rest of it.
Yeah, that's Mm-hmm. No,
that's an example I remember hearing as a kid, that the worst horror, or the best horror movies are the ones that don't just show you everything.
They don't show you the monster. That's right. You get to fill it in. And so Jaws was kind of like that for the most part. They eventually show it, but that's also the case with, the classic example of that, another classic example of that is Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, when he's cutting the ear off. They dance around it, you don't see it, and it's more horrific when you don't see it. The radio is hot media. Film used to be hot media, like the projected image on the screen. Like you look at a movie like Cinema Paradiso, where like it activates the whole community, or like you go into theaters in black neighborhoods and people like yell back at the screen. Tradition. I don't know what it's like these days because nobody goes to theaters, but historically that was the case. And like white people sit passively, and those. I think the way McLuhan would talk about it would be to say that the white culture generally comes from 500 years of reading books, and the black culture has more recently come out of a more oral culture.
Sure.
where the sound is more where the logos is rather than in the written word. And in the written word, you are asked to be a passive observer. There is no way to interact with it.
And in indigenous cultures as well were oratory.
Yeah, that's right. All what we would call archaic, which is it's not a dismissal to say that. It might be, those cultures, those tribal archaic cultures might in many ways be superior in terms of the consciousness of the individuals and the full range of their awareness.
Well, I mean, if you take, there's a wonderful history book, and it's not written by like a university historian, so it's not influenced by, say, the disciplines of history, the popular disciplines of now. Anyways, he wrote this book. It's called Captive Paradise, and he talks about that when the explorers went to Hawaii, they hit like a mass effect. So all the technology, all the things that they brought, weapons, right, guns and things like that, they literally didn't have to discover them. It was like a complete, like they entered a time warp in cultural advancement.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to check this book out, because at one point they discovered that their gods are false, right? So, and they had nothing else. They're just like, well, this is all bullshit. Like the volcano god is not real. I mean, I'm paraphrasing the book here. So what do? If we have no purpose, we pursue pleasure.
Yeah, that's certainly in our milieu, in our consumer saturated milieu. I mean, we pursue pleasure with the frustrating sort of desperate attempts to recover some kind of identity out of it, right? And so,
yes,
right, because we're like we're looking for meaning that as it relates back to you.
Yeah.
Because so that's
out of something that is engineered by somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. I'm trying to find myself in this, but it's not even the thing that I created.
That's right. After our last couple conversations, you had mentioned Simon Prentice's book and speech, and I went back and I checked out your interview with him, and it was really great. I had a lot of thoughts on it, and then what was the other thing that you just said that? The idea of the gods being dead. It's funny. Before we had mentioned Eric Havelock's book, Preface to Plato, and he observes that the form of speech that they used was really the container, and their poetry, Homer and so forth, was the container of their social order. So it was like their bureaucracy. It was like their libraries and so forth. And so it had certain technical encyclopedic knowledge built into it that was fundamental, that members of the society, because they memorized it, could sort of grapple with the basics of the civilization. And he notices that something that was invented with the phonetic alphabet was, I'm going to get this wrong, I think, but it was like present infinitive, neuter present infinitive, or something. But the idea of an idea, of wetness or of divinity being a thing, like that was a grammatical innovation that never existed before. And in that environment, how are you going to describe general principles but by personifying them? And so this is the origin of where all these gods and goddesses came from, is that they're personified ideas. And because if you don't have a way of talking about it, they don't exist. But clearly humans need to talk about those things. Right. So you would refer to Apollo, but when you said Apollo, people weren't thoughtlessly being like, oh, I believe there's a sort of a man up in the clouds or behind the curtains or in history who is sort of with me in my head. No, it was very clear. It's just the personification of an idea.
Yeah.
So so when you start to think about the Greek pantheon or the Greek,
well, it's almost interchangeable with Catholicism.
well, so right, but by the time you're getting into like Zoroastrianism and Christianity, by the time you're getting into the Hebrew thing, there's a reduction. The monotheistic idea is to reduce all of those things of principle and say there's one of them above everything else, if not only.
Yeah.
And then what that does is it happens probably because it's no longer necessary to have the pantheon of gods, because now you've invented this new way of talking where you can talk about the abstract idea of love. You don't need to talk about Venus, right? And so take it or leave it, for whatever it's worth, that notion of the divinity or the god as the personification kind of maybe somehow, I don't know, got distilled, you might say, or reduced, or maybe it became metastasis. I don't know. But you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it started with animism, like you only knew what was within that area of which you occupied. So obviously that tree that at this one point in time bears fruit, you're going to think, whoa, that's like, there's a god there or something. There's something powerful there.
It's the spirit of the thing. It's the treeness. Yeah. We can use the word treeness now, but there didn't used to be a way of saying treeness. And right. So in that case where you don't have treeness, you need to say the spirit of the tree, the god of the tree. So the people that are animistic are talking about the spirits of things, the manifestation of things, the effects of things. Mm-hmm. And of course, the artists draw decorations of them. They draw a pictorial representation of it. But that, it's kind of the height of Western civilization's hubris or monotheism's hubris to be like, oh, those people are just stupid because they believe in lots of gods. I mean, it's just as stupid to believe in one god. It's like, right? Yeah. Unless we're talking about the idea of the totality of divinity or the totality of universe or anything. But then when you put it into a monotheistic situation, it becomes difficult to parse, because you're like, wait, is it the creator? Is it the judge? Is it which part of the everything is it right now? And you don't have a vocabulary for describing its nuances, and you end up with all these contradictions. You say, but he does that, but he does that. It's like, well, why do you have to have the one thing in the first place? That's one question you can ask.
From animism to atheism.
Right. But I don't know. Yeah. So atheism.
But just meaning like this is the gradual trajectory that we seem to be. So, okay. I found this out the other day. Clockwork Orange. Do you know why it's called A Clockwork Orange?
Oh, I think there's a lot of hypotheses, but what do you think? What did you hear?
Apparently it means this, that you have no free will. You just have the appearance of free will.
Oh, I thought you were going to describe where the word itself, or the title itself, Clockwork Orange, comes from.
That's what I'm getting at, is that you like a clockwork orange. It looks like you're juicy and you're this wonderful orange,
funny.
But you're spun just like a clockwork.
I get it.
You're going to do what you've been told to do. And first it was God, and now it's the state.
There's another.
I've never even seen the film.
You haven't? Oh, you have to see it.
I know.
Watch everything Kubrick. Never hesitate to watch a Kubrick.
2001. I love I love those films. I'm not a big film guy. I'm more into books.
Yeah, that's clear.
But
so there's a film analyst named Rob Ager, Rob Ager, I think is his name, who's got a YouTube site and puts a lot of great content up. And I thought when you brought this up, you were going to be talking about him, because he recently did a piece on. It's not going to spoil anything for you, but when you do see, you saw. Okay, so in 2001. In 2001, there's that scene toward the end where it's sort of the hyperspace scene, and all of a sudden on the screen there's like 5 diamonds, and then 2 more diamonds. So there's 7 diamonds, right?
Yeah.
And so Rob Egger is like generally a really astute critic and analyst, and he's well read and everything, and he gives great talk on stuff like the occult and secret society stuff relative to Eyes Wide Shut. That's very interesting and pretty astute. And on this case, he was like, I don't necessarily know what this is. What can you say about 7 diamonds? And so the comment section was pretty great. And then there's a series of 7 diamonds also that are present in both Full Metal Jacket and in Clockwork Orange. And this gets back to what you're saying.
When is it in Full Metal Jacket?
In Full Metal Jacket, he's noticing them in the motifs of the architecture and in the signage. So there's a lot of Vietnamese signage in that he's looked into closely. And of course, it's Kubrick, so everything's intentional.
Yes. Yeah.
But so he's asking about the 7, and so here's what I think it is, and it explains the Clockwork Orange, I think, pretty well.
Okay.
The clockwork part you're totally on point about. Yes, it's like the mechanized human, right? You're like
there's no good or evil. You just do what you're gonna do.
Yes, the body is going along in its motions, right? But the seven diamonds 7 always sort of refers to the levels of transcendence that occur in the macrocosm, in the microcosm, in the mesocosm, and in the anthropocosmos. So in the anthropocosmos, it's your chakras, and we talked about that before.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
There's 7 chakras, right?
There's 7 chakras.
Oh shit! Here we go. Okay.
Which means, yeah, so 7 glands,
Mm-hmm.
and each gland controls a pair of organs, and so you've got sort of 14 organs, and each of them in their Hindu origins have a color associated with each one. So your root chakra is red, your sacral chakra is orange, which is your reproductive chakra, and then your solar plexus is yellow. Wait, is that right? Your heart chakra is green. Your throat chakra is blue, and then your third eye is sort of purple, I think, and then your crown chakra is sort of like this ethereal light. It's sort of lavender, and of course, so what you're getting is the whole rainbow. So the rainbow, there's 7 colors. Days of the week, there's 7 days, each named after the 7 of the 7 visible God planets. That's right. And within the God planets, there are, of course, the planets, and then there's the sun and the moon. Mm-hmm. So you've got 5 and you've got 2 for these heavenly bodies that you can see with the naked eye.
Sunday, sun, day of the sun. Monday, day of the moon. Tuesday
is Mars.
Okay.
Wednesday is Mercury. In French, you say Mercredi.
Thursday is Thursday,
which is Jupiter.
Okay.
Friday is Venus.
Why Friday?
It's Scandinavian, I think, for like Freta. I don't know how to say it.
Okay, here's the crazy thing. Sorry to interject. But all of these different languages coming together to create the days of the week in English.
So that's just the accident of history as they were put together. But the thing is like it's a pretty universal idea of 7 days of the week that goes very, very far back, and it's at the level of being archetypal, right? So it's kind of like Jung's archetypes. It's nearly universal. It's hard to imagine it being otherwise. I think it's hard to find societies that don't do it that way. If there are any, I don't know. But so those 5 planets, and then the sun and the moon, and Saturn, obviously, we didn't mention, but obviously, right? So those 5 planets are the body of the solar system, and then the sun and the moon are the masculine and the feminine. But also compare it. So Rob Egger asks about what's going on with the 5 and the 2. Why are they presented in 5 and 2? And also when you see it in Clockwork Orange, there's one scene where there's like 2 diamonds on the side of a sort of a banister, and then 5. And so it keeps doing this 5 and the 2. And then in Barry Lyndon, there's playing cards that have the 7 of diamonds with 2 above, and then 2 with the 1 in the middle. So you get a 5. And what that refers to, I think, is traditionally the body, the physical body, is referred to by 5. You got 5 fingers. You got 5 extremities, your arms and your head, off of the mass of the body. The pentagon, which is the defender of the nation, is the sort of the body. It's thought to be like, the arms are associated with this 5. It's not just Earth, which is the number 4, but then also in the Pythagorean pentagram, there's 5, and that's the quintessence of reality, which is air, water, earth, fire, and ether, or plasma, or whatever you might want to call that quintessence, the 5th magic stuff. And so when you're thinking about that number 5 as it relates to the 7 chakras, it's like that 5 is your physical body, but then the 2 transcendent, your third eye and your crown, are beyond the body. And so where Kubrick is dealing with this character Alex, who you'll discover when you see the movie, he's kind of like an id character. He's not somebody that you're supposed to like. He's supposed to make you uncomfortable, and you're kind of, unless you're a nihilistic teenage boy, you're generally gonna loathe him. But he's still the protagonist, and your psyche can't help but follow him through. So it's a very discomforting film.
The other book that comes to mind, Catcher in the Rye. Okay, he's kind of like that guy, right?
No, because Catcher in the Rye is not a nihilistic young man. He's a frustrated young man searching, but he's not out destroying things.
Okay. And Alex is a
destructive character.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but so he's sort of driven by his sacral chakra. He's out having sex and having ultra violence, and he associates violence and sex. And he and his gang go and rob people and beat people up for pleasure. And so this is like the Clockwork Orange. It's sort of, I think, what Kubrick is talking about there in the titling and in the context of the film is the way in which the contemporary society, the society he's depicting in the near future, instrumentalizes the worst of people just to keep them kind of in this predictable cycle that feeds the system. He becomes sort of the anti-hero cause celeb. He becomes famous for getting caught as this horrible, violent person, and then the whole society goes into this clockwork mechanism whereby they're using him as a symbol and playing with him as a mouse in a maze. And I won't tell you how it ends.
Well, I read the synopsis on Wikipedia, so
okay. Yeah, no, you got to see these things.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the orange comes from. I think yes, there's the nice juicy orange that is sweet.
Orange is what part? That's your pleasure seeking part. Right?
Yeah, it's your reproductive organs.
And that's your clockwork.
In this case, yeah. I mean, I mean, in our current society, I think, in the 20th century, early 21st century societies, I think it's safe to say that we're primarily consumers. And we identify with the things we consume. We choose the things we consume because they gratify us and make us think of ourselves. And then when, we get real pleasure by describing our tastes. I like this and I don't like that, and I won't have it that way. And if I can't get cheese on it, then it's just not good enough. All sorts of mentalities about retail consumption. Yeah. But the thing is like, if you take that yogic notion of different levels of consciousness that exist in the body, you can kind of rise above that, and you can say, oh, well, that's kind of meaningless. What you are is mostly a matter of convention and habit, and has nothing at all to do with who you are, except for the fact that all the nutrition that you put in your body becomes your body and effectively determines your health, right? So you want to eat things that have a lot of color and a lot of nutrients and aren't out of factories, and so on and so forth.
Well, the other thing that we're talking about is, and I wrote it down, was archetypes, right? And this idea of archetypes versus cliches. What do you see as the difference between an archetype and a cliche?
So a cliche is an old saw, right? It's such a worn yarn, mm-hmm. a well-worn yarn, a commonplace that you kind of stop to even think about what it means.
It's lost its meaning.
Kind of, or at least it's like a catch-all. So you can kind of dismiss an idea with a cliche. You don't have to do any thinking.
Okay.
And archetypes can be used that way, I suppose, but the whole point of the archetypes is that, when Jung was looking at the human psyche, mm-hmm. he was observing coherent patterns,
right,
from people's dreams, and saying, well, everyone seems to have this figure, this symbol in the dream, and it seems to function to that person in vaguely similar ways, right? So like the idea of a father, the idea of a child, the idea of a grandfather, the idea of a tree, the idea of... There's a number of them that are sort of weird because they don't seem to show up in physical human reality like dragons. And so one wonders, was there a point at which humans and dinosaurs, some kind of psychic thing, or existed in the same consciousness, because the dragon archetype is universal. But everyone's got a bird archetype, and everyone has a sense of the seasons. I mean, there's just certain formal realities about life that impose themselves on our minds, on our interiority,
right?
And those are called archetypes.
Yeah. So it's like an original idea that kind of transcends cultures, and
they transcend culture,
possibly unifies them.
And if you're using the word original there, meaning from the origin, not like fresh and novel, but like
like
always fundamental.
And thank you, fundamental. Yeah.
So, that's
so archetype is a fundamental idea, and a cliche is like
not just an idea, but it's really a symbol.
It's a fundamental symbol.
It's a metaphor, an analog that has a visual mm-hmm. and thematic presence.
Right. And a cliche is like, it's like a weird red herring of... Yeah, there's just something to me that there's an important distinction between what is an archetype and what is a cliche, especially in kind of society. Like, I think that we can sometimes be misled by the cliches and not see the archetype, the answer.
Sure,
like we can get so distracted by information, right? We can get, like what is the thesis statement versus what is this kind of information that we can be distracted by.
Yeah.
And in our society, I mean, distractibility is is it at an all-time high? Or like I sometimes think like 150 years ago when, we were so like now I could just be on my computer all day and just entertain myself all day if I wanted to, right? 150 years ago, like, did people have more time? Did time move slower back then? Is time speeding up? Like,
sure. I mean, maybe like I think the psychic effect of information flow and so forth causes the appearance of time moving faster. There's certainly, one has to become almost dissociative in order to get a little time to yourself. But back to something you started out there before talking about time. About cliche, so they're both conversational objects, right? They're both ideas, the things that are cliches and things that are archetypes. And I think an easy way to think about it is that cliches tend to be superficial and, like I said, shorthand for thinking, whereas archetypes, you kind of have to dig under the surface and you have to be open to their potential.
Right.
So before we started, you brought up Joe Rogan, and there's a funky Joe Rogan conversation with the guy who started MAPS. Oh, damn it, I forget his name.
Multidisciplinary psychedelic studies.
Yes.
But they're using various
They just endorse the exploration and academic pursuit of all understanding about all of them.
Yeah. With the exception of meth, probably.
Well, so that wouldn't be considered a psychedelic.
Yes. So we're talking LSD,
psilocybin, MDMA,
wheat, marijuana.
I think so. Yeah, cannabis tends to be categorized that way, though culturally it's not thought of that way. And he talks about this time that he tried DMT with a group of they were the cognoscenti of the psychedelic movement at the time. And he describes, he's a Jewish dude, and he describes this feeling he got that now DMT you will dissociate from it. So you're not in it, you're kind of away from it. But he had this effect, this sensibility that like he is Hitler. Insofar as when you're on a psychedelic, there's this sense that like you are the universe and the universe is you, and you have this sort of not immediate, but you tend to have this empathy with all of it. And if you're going to have empathy with all of it, you have to have empathy with the good and the evil. You have to discover the evil within yourself, that it's there. And why did I bring that up? To recognize that when you get into conversations about archetypes, there is no good or bad. The dragon isn't bad. The death card in tarot isn't bad, right? It
is.
Yeah, that's right. It's just it is. And whereas, cliches have the effect of dismissing or of cutting things short, being summaries and shorthand. Which like maybe this is a time card. Yeah.
Right.
Like superficial.
It's so easy. For example, Hitler. Like, let's go down that rabbit hole.
Great cliche. He's such an overused cliche.
But he wasn't like, people are like, he was born evil. Like, man, something like, if we try to understand how does a person get there versus this person's such an asshole, like, there's a difference there. There's a difference in outlook. Right?
Yeah, no, most people think of Hitler as being just figure with no ground. Like he's a completely acontextual person, and everyone that ever did anything under his regime is all his fault.
Yeah. And we use him as a comparison for how bad we are not, right? Like, well, at least I'm not Hitler.
Right. And we love to call our worst enemies always. That's the moment you end the conversation.
Yeah, guys like Hitler. But my point is that like, he wasn't just born like some tabula rasa, it's an evil tabula rasa, right? Like blank slate. He became something.
Yeah.
right? And we're all kind of constantly becoming things. But in
Yeah.
our society, what I wonder is that depending on where somebody is in something, it's like that person's the enemy. Like we're not trying to understand them. Like for example, um, this is a faux pas, but people who abuse their partners, right? Like, domestic violence.
Abusers.
It's
Yeah.
it's terrible, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a like people aren't just born that way though. Something has had to have happened to them that they become this thing. But we don't like that idea. We like this
No.
idea of they're bad, you're good, right? And there's something. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it shouldn't be a cliche because maybe it should be a common phrase that people sort of just start to intuit more. And I'm not going to remember the name of the author. He was a local guy here in New York. He had started out in advertising. He wrote a couple books and self-promoted them and had these very funny, rather manipulative but interesting ways of promoting his books. He wrote two of them. And one of them always comes back to this refrain: hurt people hurt people.
100%.
That's it. Like corruption comes from abuse. Now, it also comes from it comes from any kind of fear, and fear can come from being alienated in the other direction. Mm-hmm. So like, the cliche is power corrupts, but poverty also corrupts, and not necessarily poverty, not meaning not having money, poverty of spirit, right?
Yeah.
So hurt people hurt people. If you've been hurt and you haven't forgiven yourself, eventually you're going to be hurting somebody else in the course, because you're going to find yourself in a moment of tension projecting your own, not.
And to even bring it like full circle, that's why, because we were talking about, fame and fortune, and sometimes to have everything you want, is that a curse or is that a blessing?
Right. I mean, it's obviously people wouldn't work so hard if they didn't think that it was going to solve all their problems. And then people get there and they're like, oh, it doesn't solve all my problems.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the journey or the destination. But the problem is maybe we shouldn't have destinations, because what do we do once we get there?
Right. Well, this is one of these things where maybe the destination is a good idea and shouldn't be manifest. So there's this Hasidic, a large community of Hasidic people here in New York who protest the existence of the nation of Israel, because to them, they believe that Israel is a religious idea. It is exactly what you're talking about there, that destination without a destination. And so their attitude, I think, I haven't researched or interviewed to know in too much in depth, but the on the surface, it seems to be that their argument is that this is a religious conception that is profaned by trying to make it real, and therefore is doomed to its own internal failure.
And by that argument, it would mean that the nation of Britain is God, because they mandated Israel.
That's right.
By that argument, I guess.
Well, maybe, that's one way to look at it. I mean, but again, it could just be a fancy grift. Who knows at the level of geopolitics at that scale, where what's intentional and what's not, and who's pulling whose wool over whose eyes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. I mean, like, no matter, okay, so I forget who it is, but anyways, it was way back in I think maybe King Darius the First or something, during the ancient.
He was Greek, right? Or no, he was Syrian.
Greek.
He was Greek?
Yeah, he was Syrian, but I think it was during the time of ancient Greece and stuff like that. Anyways, he walked up to a guy from Athens or something.
Okay.
And he said, what would it take for you to eat your dead? And they're like, I would never do that. That's repulsive. How could you say that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And then he walked to an indigenous person of that region. I forget what the name of them is. And he said, what would it take for you to burn your dead? And the guy said, that's horrific. Why would we ever do that? We can't do that. Point being here is that these two different cultures had very different practices. and to them, the practice of the other one was morally reprehensible. So how can we ever come up with any, my point here is, how can we ever come up with any solutions what to one group might seem like the obvious conclusion and to another is completely reprehensible? Like, how can we ever come to any solutions?
I don't know if the aspiration to come to a final solution is a very good idea. But also, like, you know, whose role is it to, who's ever given legitimately the power to try to solve these things? Solutions and proofs belong to logic and to math, and that's about it, you know, not even to medicine and science.
And what I'm kind of getting at here is there really, like, is there objective truth or is it subjective truth?
So I think there's more interesting stuff to talk about relative to this analogy of, you know, could you eat your dead or could you burn your dead? Like, right. So both of them are responding or manipulating, or they're in the context of the disgust response, right? And the disgust response is one of the oldest limbic things. It's ancient in our physiology.
Sure.
And of course, back to that question of Hitler and how he was able to manipulate people to want to just destroy other people in some of the most inhumane and mechanical ways, was to trigger their disgust response.
Yes.
To say, oh, this whole set of people is exactly vermin, is as if a diseased set of people, and any interaction with them will lead to my demise, right? Like, you wouldn't eat rancid meat. So it's the same disgust response. Yeah. Now, here's the thing that's amazing is we're going through this exactly right now.
Yeah.
The idea that a disease that doesn't kill very much is an upper respiratory thing that may or may not be a bioweapon, may or may not have been unleashed intentionally, but is certainly novel, has never been seen before, sweeping the world. And there's this fascinating thing where, because of the fear of that thing, societies have lined up against one another. And the people who are committed to a kind of pharma regime believe that the people who don't participate in that regime are killing them. Despite the fact that there's this sort of funny irony that most of the people who are getting the disease now are all vaccinated. I mean, not all. I mean, certainly some people who aren't are getting it as well. And their whole thought is, well, yes, but it's not going to kill us. And it's like, well, it wasn't killing that many people in the first place. But the fascinating thing, the salient point, without sort of trying to draw lines and boundaries here and do an us and them dance, is that the political response utilizes that disgust response perfectly. And it ties it into the fear of death, which is something that, especially as Americans, we are not adept at dealing with. Like, most of our advertising and most of our consumption is driven, not just longevity, that is a nice thing, but it's driven by the fear of death and the denial and the avoidance of the conversation. You know, what is that midlife crisis that makes you want to go out and get a Porsche and date a 20-year-old, right?
Why do we have such an aversion to death as our society?
Because you can't manipulate people without it. Like, this is something I was listening to Alan Watts last week, and I was surprised at his definition of it. His sort, when he sort of said, well, what's a mystic? To him, at the time that he was speaking, in the late 60s, early 70s, was a mystic is somebody, ultimately, it's much more than this, but he was saying a mystic is somebody who doesn't fear death. And so you can't get them to do anything.
Destroy them.
You can destroy them, but they'll take it in stride.
Yeah. You can't. The only way you can stop them is to kill them.
Right, and then it's one of those things: is do you make them stronger by beatifying them and martyring them and so on? Like, yeah. So, actually, that made me think back to Simon Prentice's interview he did with you, where he talked about his friend, or your friend, who is the biographer of Bob Marley.
Oh, yeah, Roger Steffens.
He's your buddy?
I interviewed him. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay. I did you guys happen to talk about Bob Marley's death?
Well, he details it in his book, but
Does he? Is he the one that wrote about the needle in the boot?
that was a theory. Yeah.
Is that a theory he doesn't endorse?
He just, so he put on somebody else's boots.
No. He was
Okay.
he was the story that I understand is that it was known that he had a sort of, not fetish, but he as you know, as a rock performer who receives gifts, people knew that if you give him cowboy boots, he'll be grateful, thankful. He liked a cowboy boot collection. And so there was somebody who he might have known. I think maybe they were just getting introduced. I don't know, but it was, this person had a relation, either a family relation.
His father worked for the CIA.
That's right. And so the notion was that it was one of these.
He was a filmmaker.
He was given. Oh, okay, yeah. So he was given cancer through the needle in the boot.
Yeah.
And it would have killed him faster, because who gets cancer of the toe, right? But it didn't kill him faster because he was on so much cannabis that it prevented his immediate death.
Well, he always had a messed up foot.
Oh, did he?
About that. Yeah, and it never healed because he'd play soccer.
Oh yeah.
And like his toe, he had something happen to his toe. I forget now. But anyways, his book, unreal, talks about, again, a guy who could not be, like, he prophesized his death as a young man.
Oh
He
yeah.
was like, I'm gonna die when I'm 37 or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy book, man. Like,
I love the story about why he, like, what people are like, hey man, Bob, you know, you sort of, he was always an outsider in Jamaica, but once he became big, he was sort of like the man in Jamaica, right?
Yeah.
And of course, you know, promoting for social justice in his way and in his time, but also driving a BMW. And so people criticized him for how that was seemingly a little hypocritical. And he's like, no man, it's Bob Marley and the Wailers. BMWs.
It's a good joke. Yeah, I mean, he signed checks for people.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so apparently this is an anecdotal story, but one guy walked up to Bob and he would just take like offers from people, like Dragon's Den. Only I don't even think the offer had to be half that, you know, it didn't have to be as thought out as that. Anyways, this one guy's like, yeah, I want to get into the coconut oil business. And Bob Marley was like, yeah, sure. And he signed him like some big check. Somebody's like, Bob, why did you do that? He said, well, I've always wanted to get into the oil industry.
What a great sense of humor.
Man.
What a good sense of humor.
He was a good dude. But anyways, where was I going with this?
Well, I brought up Prentice. Let's see, Marley, cancer.
But I do want to go back to this idea of fame and fortune.
Okay.
You know, because I mean, there's a guy right there, Bob Marley, who really, he received such incredible fame and fortune, but it's almost like how he responded to it is apparently at the end of his life, he said to Stephen Marley, money can't buy you life.
For sure.
Right. And it's this idea of, I think, like, what was that original? Because we were going somewhere with that at the very beginning, and I want to bring it back because, believe it or not, we've been kind of dancing around it in our own way. And that's that once you get the thing that you're after, are you forever changed, or can you still be that person? I mean, it's the rosebud theory, right? Of Citizen Kane.
Yeah. I like this. There's a sort of, I don't know if it's a Zen idea, or I don't know what the origin of it is. But the idea of, well, in Japanese art, there's this idea of never making anything perfect, because only God can be perfect. So the master would create a perfect work, and then he'd do something to screw it up, knowing that he didn't want to have the hubris of the divine. I think there's something to that. Have you ever burned anything you've made?
Oh yeah, like letters and things like that.
Okay, letters. Yep, that's something. So that's something maybe done out of pain.
Catharsis, yeah.
Catharsis, right? But like, have you ever made an object of art that you thought just either might exist forever, just sit on the shelf and get dusty, or be a gift or anything like that, and just destroyed it.
No.
That's cathartic. It's amazing.
That sounds like iconoclasm.
That's
destroying.
Right. It's iconoclastic. You're preventing it from becoming institutionalized. And so, right, think a great idea, a great piece of beauty, a thing of beauty, a great piece of art. Once it becomes institutionalized, it becomes something else. It's like that thing we were saying. An artist doesn't choose their audience. Bob Dylan didn't choose his audience, and eventually got tired of the way his audience was framing him, and so he rejected them and kind of started over, or at least was iconoclastic toward his own image. And only through that could he progress through, right? I guess the thing we're talking about is, can the destination ever really be gratifying? Or do you need to adopt an attitude of flow, and like once you've got it, then you can say, okay, well we can let that go. A lot of people naturally have, like, they're planning their whole lives. They've got 5-year plans. They want to get the house, and they want to get the family, and you get these thresholds, these markers, and the whole idea of the retirement fund and the 401k is predicated on this idea that, if you draw a stake out 50 years from now and you start throwing rings at it, then eventually you'll get a tower of rings. Mm-hmm. But it ignores the possibility that rings won't be valuable then. That the whole reason to have wealth ostensibly is to glorify your life and the people around you, and to gratify you. And that, if you were to die tomorrow, you can't take it with you. So in the currency of life and in the current of flow, maybe saving isn't such a good idea. But though, of course, saving again for a rainy day or for the apocalypse isn't maybe that bad an idea. The idea of starting a garden and all that sort of thing seems kind of gratifying in its own right, even if it doesn't end up saving you from Skynet. In that pursuit of the destination, there was this thing you talked about with Simon Prentice that I thought was really great, a statement he made, that identity is the theft of the self.
Right.
I really, really love that. And I think the destination, if there's a destination that's got any merit, is the self. And it's not the ego self, right? It's the Atman self. It's the self, not self. And he mentioned that there's sort of identity, religion, and culture as sort of 3 gradations. And it's funny because it totally conformed to a tripartite sort of model that I had come up with, inspired by Bowie. He has a song called Loving the Alien. And in it, he has a line that says, salvation for the mirror blind.
Salvation for the mirror blind.
I love that term, the mirror blind.
Because we're just blinded by the surface of what we see in the mirror?
I'm saying, no, the mirror blind is people who can't see themselves.
Oh. And
all of us have it to some degree. It's very difficult to sort of hear yourself, right? And especially, you're doing blogs, you learn to get over it pretty quick.
Because hearing yourself is like, oh, it's kind of weird.
It's kind of weird.
Certainly at first, right? Because you're like, oh my God, that's my voice.
Yeah. And that's the superficial element of it. I mean, like, that really seeing yourself the way that other people see you, or the way that the world sees you. Most people have a high degree of mirror blindness. They have trouble seeing the self that isn't just their tastes and their consumable habits.
But they're intense.
Like Bedouins?
No, but like their intentions. Like they
their
can't
intentions.
See their intentions.
They can't see that's right. They don't know where their intentions come from, right? That's a severe mirror blindness. But so I was like, wow, okay, yeah, there is total mirror blindness, but then there's also tribal blindness, And this happens anytime you're into a sports team. This happens anytime you're into nationalism. You say, our army is going to beat your army and we're a better nation, even if you've never been to the other nation, never met a person from the other country. And then there's another element, and that's paradigm blindness, right? So if you look back at times in history, going back, and you say, okay, well, there was Galileo, and he was dealing with the church and their beliefs, and you go back, and you go back to like the time of Christ and the Romans, and they had their worldview and everything. And we're here in the modern time, and we all know we've got it figured out. Our science is better than all theirs. We have all the answers. You know, we there's not much more to discover.
Our gods are better than theirs.
Our gods are better than theirs, exactly. But every period of time has that ego about it. The whole structure of society is predicated on the certainty and the surety of that, right?
Are you talking about like the glass ceiling of ideas?
I wouldn't put it that way, but that's one way I guess you could think of it. I'm sorry, but paradigm is any period in history has certain boundary conditions. So the glass ceiling, sure.
Cause
maybe not ceiling, because it's everywhere. It's all around you. There's a bubble of reality that is described and defined.
The glass capsule.
It's the iron prison. I don't know if it needs to be glass, because you can't see through it. You can't see to the other side of it. So like when Melville was writing Moby Dick, they were living in a paradigm of whale oil, right? So all of the light that you use and all the fuel you use came from whale oil. So there's this karmic relationship that society had with the whale. Like, we'll sacrifice the whale so we can have light. And we live at the end of the oil paradigm, not the whale oil paradigm, but the petroleum oil paradigm, where it's even become some of our currencies. And it's very difficult for us to see outside of that. We put the changes in climate in the context of oil. Everything we see is this, and we can't see through to the emergent paradigm, which is sort of an electromagnetic paradigm, which is sort of the paradigm that Tesla talked about and was suppressed for. And lots and lots of independent thinkers pursued it. And also, like, at the height of military innovation, or even cell phones. Our cell phones are predicated on the electromagnetic paradigm. Our microwave ovens are. And when you start to put those two tools together, so like you got the microwave oven, which puts its microwave in toward a thing, and you think of the cell phone as having these signals that go out and everywhere. It's technologically not a difficult thing to aim, and there's another thing called a phased array, which allows you to aim a beam, which you might have heard of, like the HARP array or that sort of thing. But
that's a weapon.
It's a weapon and a research device. Everything's a tool and a weapon, right? Like, so.
That's a damn good point. Yeah, a rifle, a tool to one, weapon to others.
That's right. And so if you put together the cell phone, the microwave oven, and the HARP array, or a phased array, all of a sudden you've just made obsolete every metal gun you have. Because you have an invisible tool by which you can turn your gun into lump metal at a distance. And this exists. These exist, but they have yet to emerge for people to get to know them. Yeah. And you'd have to experience their effects all the time because they are invisible, to believe it. Or you'd need some kind of lens that would allow you to see it, because most people don't believe anything they can't see. But they believe in their cell phones.
And I might be going on a separate thread here, but like warfare as the ultimate holy shit, right? Because think about it. In World War I, the first Battle of Somme or whatever, they led cavalry charges against machine guns.
Yeah.
It was catastrophic. So it would be like, has war become obsolete?
No. We're in war right now, if you follow McLuhan's description of it. But so here's the thing: is pitched battle
obsolete?
Is maybe it might not be necessary anymore. But by the same token, it's so profitable. I mean, think about. It's obsolete in terms of nation states equally determining where their new boundary will be or whether they can take one another over, yes, they're obsolete. In terms of their utility for managing foreigners, they're not obsolete. It's still big business.
Here's what I'm thinking though. Like, okay, so global, like whatever's happening with the climate, we got flooded here in Vancouver, like horrible flooding. Like thousands of people have been displaced from their homes.
Just now, recently?
Yeah, like this week.
Oh,
it's
wow.
horrible. Check it out, man. It's wild. Like places are underwater, and it's November. Like it's not exactly summer right now. Not that you want to be underwater anytime.
No. But in the cold, it's even harder. Sure.
Yeah. So, so this is happening. So I'm wondering, like, you know, does there come a time when we stop doing the us and them thing and we realize, okay, we have got to work together, and we're against Mother Nature here?
Well, yeah, that's potentially a good thing, but it's just like anything else. It's also not necessarily a good thing. It's like Ronald Reagan speaking to the UN, and I think like 83 or something, talking about how, you know, I could only imagine how the humanity would come together if there were an alien invasion, and we were all.
He said that?
Yeah. It's really twisted because you're like, holy shit, they've been planning this fake alien invasion for a long time. Because if you could do a false flag with an alien invasion, you can affect the effect of an alien invasion. You can unify the world, and you know it's very clear that there's a lot of efforts to unify the world, and all the COVID effects seem to be doing that kind of conveniently. And the idea of millennialism in terms of like end times, which is what
not new,
but it's what climate change is the analog for.
Sure, hell yeah.
Right? Like, oh, we've done it to ourselves. Like, well, not we, but somebody has. And also, is the image on the television or even the image outside when there's a storm truly represented by the things that are said they are? It's let's just say that there's a dearth of information, and there's a lot of suppression about dissent, which is usually an indicator that, in my opinion, that there's truth to be found there, because if there weren't truth to be found there, there'd be no reason to suppress it, or to suppress it, right? Of course, now who knows? They've weaponized the idea of misinformation, and misinformation is only something that the non-establishment does, which is kind of a funny paradox.
So, like, what is the future here? How do we prepare for it, in the sense of, like, are we just going in the complete wrong direction with things? Like, are we just,
in terms of the global geopolitics and industrial innovation? Yeah, it's probably not. I don't think it's going in the right direction, with the possibility that like the psychological and sociological responses to these traumas will vindicate even the behaviorists, and people will come out better. But I don't buy that for a second. You know, like that's kind of like that's what the sort of new age Burning Man style thing is. Like, oh, we can integrate with the AI computer and we'll be better off. And it's like, yeah, you're going to lose a lot of control over your self-will.
Do you believe in free will?
That's a funny thing, because, this goes back to the
Clockwork Orange.
No. I was thinking about the lecture Sapolsky in his first lecture, to the big lecture that he gives, one of the things he says, okay, who here believes in all of these things? And one of the things he says is free will.
Yeah.
I contend that free will is not something that physiological sciences are capable of addressing, because what those always do in the they want to look for free will being everywhere all the time. Is it a universal kind of
okay, is it ubiquitous? Like,
is it ubiquitous, and is everything happening because people intend it? That's what they mean to say, and the answer to that is obviously no. Obviously no. Yeah. Lots of people are somnambulists. They're just walking around like they're in a dream state, not thinking at all. Seriously, the more they're entranced by the screen, the more that's the case. But here's the thing: is in like, I'd like to go to Sapolsky and be like, Home Slice, do you feel in your life that you have no choice but to do what you're doing right now, or is this just the best of all possibilities? Because, you know, you can read William Styron's book, Sophie's Choice, right? Like, this child or this child. Yeah. And in that moment, you're going to have free will. It's going to be a painful free will. But there's a model, an archetypal model, a poetic model that comes up every now and then. And one of the places it came up really clearly or obliquely clearly is in Inside Llewyn Davis by the Coen Brothers. And there's this notion of the gate of horn and the gate of ivory. And this goes back to an old Greek idea, if not older than that. And the reason it has those words, horn and ivory, is because it's not quite a homonym, but there's something in the way they're spelled or sounded out in Greek, in ancient Greek. The word for horn means fulfillment, or is associated with the word fulfillment, and the word for ivory is associated with the word deception. So we think of horn and ivory as they're synonyms with one another, the same thing. And the Greeks thought that too. But because of the nature of the word, one is fulfillment and one is deception. Now, the hero approaches the gate and is confronted by a choice between two seemingly equal things. And how do you discern? How did you know which one? It's like in the movie Labyrinth. It's like Jennifer? No. The heroine getting to the two doors, right? And one of them is going to lie to her and one of them is going to tell her the truth. And how does she figure out which one to go through? The only way in the Greek model is that you must appeal to the advice of your dead father in a dream.
You must appeal to the dead advice of your father in the dream. Okay.
So you're going to have a dream. You have to go to your interiority and you have to say, you know, what would my father know? And this is the archetypal father, not your literal father. Like, what is the old man that I've inherited? What can he tell me about what is true and what is false here? And it's in that moment of discernment where you choose either to go left or right.
Like the intuit.
It comes intuitively. It can't be known. The idea is that it can't be known by fact and logic alone. That it's something that's going to come from deep within you. And what this does is it brings you closer to the idea of the self. I would contend, and I think the Coen Brothers demonstrate it clearly, that it's the same as the metaphor of the mercy seat. On the mercy seat, which is the Ark of the Covenant itself, you've got two cherubim on either side, right? Golden lions, winged lions. And it's in that present moment of discernment, living in the now, not thinking what's going to be better in 2 months or in 5 years or even tomorrow for breakfast, or you know, what would my ancestors would have done, you know, like, it's being right here now and discerning what is right and what is wrong. As a matter of ethics, it doesn't have to be a universal morality that goes on forever. It's just in the moment right now, which option is better? And not just better on the surface, but really better. And so that's like the idea of like occupying your Christ consciousness, or the idea of being a bodhisattva, is recognizing that in the flow of time, it's all irrelevant. Everything is right here, right now. And so this kind of maybe gets back to that idea of self. And so what is the destination? Maybe the destination is to peel back the paradigm beliefs and the paradigm assumptions that we identify with that get in the way of our selfhood, or as Prentice called it, culture. And then peeling back the layer of tribe, you know, the people we work with, the people that look like us on the television news, the people that vote the way that we do. And Prentice calls that religion in his thing. And then ultimately peeling back the blindness of the mirror, like the narcissistic
Our identity.
Right, yeah. The identified self. It's not your name, it's not your age, it's not the place you were born or your career, where you went to school. It's not who you surround yourself with. It's this thing. Now, this gets back to sort of challenging Sapolsky, because that assumes there is a self, right? And that would be analogous with the soul or the spirit, right? Because it can only exist in analog. It can't be an object.
Right.
So
right.
It's a linguistic kind of artifact, but it's a linguistic artifact that has a lot of great functions, in addition to allowing us to deal with the inevitable, like death, hypothetically, right? Because we can imagine an analogous self that continues. It doesn't need to continue in the material world, right? And so it's got a utility at the very least. But the other thing is, like, maybe there's also a physics that we don't quite understand. Like, given that we are in this mechanistic paradigm, not quite recognizing the nuances of magnetism, not understanding, the notion of counter space, or what's on the other side of the belly button. We still really don't know what our dreams are. And you brought up before, you like to think about the notion of near-death experiences and what's after death and that. And in the Egyptian cosmology, the god Amun presided over every transition from the profane waking reality and everything else. That which is and that which is not, or has yet to be, but which cannot be known. And that other side of the veil is the place where you are when you dream, the place where you go when you die, ostensibly the place where you occupy in part when you are inebriated on various things to different degrees, obviously depending on what you're on. And it could be meditation too that you're on. When you go into this spiritual mindset of being in a sacred place, that's ostensibly you're there too. And people do wonder if when we say amen, if we're saying amen for that reason. God. Yeah. Whoa. I mean, a lot of Christians will say hell no, but they also say that they don't. They also claim that the devil is not a monotheistic deity.
Well, Lucifer is the bringer of light, which has always confused me. Like, I am much more afraid of the dark than I am of the light.
I know, isn't that funny? Yeah, that's one of those funny things.
Yeah. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven.
Maybe, or here's the thing: is like what it makes you realize is that the religious claim. What is it? It's religious institutions, I should say, any bureaucratic institution is going to attempt to limit the vision and the illumination available to their followers, right? Because everyone can see clearly, then there's no reason for them to be.
Well, yeah, it's like I say all the time. I work as a counselor. If nobody was fucked up, I wouldn't have a job, but I can't seem to get out of work.
Well, that's funny. What's your feeling in that sense when you feel like you've arrived at the destination? Do you enjoy the process of being like, you don't need me anymore. Go out and learn how you're screwed up in other ways and find another therapist because we're done here. Does that happen?
I think it's like, it's more, I've taught you what you need to know right now. Like, because it's not helpful if I keep, like, if you have this, I've had the same therapist for 10 years. It's like,
exactly.
What the fuck? Is that guy not doing his job right? You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
There has to come a point when it's like, I've taught you everything that I feel like you need to know. You shared some wonderful things with me. Now it's time to go and be practical. It's time to go live.
Right. But you're dealing with kids, right?
Yes.
And they're in a school environment? Like, you're a counselor? Yeah, so they're processing through anyway. They're going to graduate this year and go to the next class.
Yeah. Yeah. But some kids, they're seeing me because of things that have happened so clearly, evidently outside of school
Sure.
that you have to help them work through.
Yeah.
And then they just want to see you because they've made a connection. You know,
Yeah.
let's play Uno or something. But it's like, I've taught you everything. Like, you're not anxious anymore. You're using the strategies that I've told you. Right. And I'll be honest, man, it's a cool feeling because some of them will go on and tell other kids. And it's like,
cool.
really, they are kind of working me out of a job.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, no, I mean,
they never will. But my point is that
yeah,
it's cool to see. And then, of course, I help people outside as well, like privately. And that's different because it's like they're coming to me to see me and then they're leaving versus I'm just there in this world all the time.
When you're in the school, you're sort of a person. You're a personage. You're like
exactly. 100%. Like I'm there when I'm there versus like
in the milieu of teachers and principals. You're Rob. You're Rob. Mr. Grant.
I'm a fixture, I guess you could say.
You're a fixture. Yeah.
But some people, you know, I believe that the old saying, call this a cliche, but people are in your life for something like a reason, a season, or the whole way through or something.
Oh, I've never heard that. That's nice. Yeah.
And it just goes to say that every relationship that we make, there's a purpose there. If you allow yourself, even somebody who really hurts your feelings, a relationship that falls apart, if you allow yourself, you will get something incredible out of that, an incredible lesson.
Yeah. Meaning is found where you put your mind.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Right? Like, here's the thing that, you know, it's one thing like to take the atheistic mechanical reality, the mechanical reductivism sort of attitude toward things and be dismissive of people who find value and solace in religious poetry or in tarot or in astrology and say those things are fake. They're not as reliable as this desk. But that's quite wrong because, like I said, you will find meaning where you put your attention, and these are reflective objects that wise people or potentially swindlers, but generally not. Anything made by a swindler is not going to last too many generations. But these traditions are there for reflection. You know, you can look at the tea leaves. You can learn to look into your toilet bowl after every day and try to find a message in it that's different than yesterday's. And you will.
Yeah. I saw Jesus on my grilled cheese sandwich.
Exactly. Right. But and the point is you know, if developing a healthy relationship with those messages and to realize that they are you. They are you.
Oh yeah. The symbolism, right? Like I saw God. Well,
you needed to see the divine, and there it was. Yeah.
Like seek and you will find.
Right. That is sort of the self, and so that's the thing. Is it's what ends up happening, and that's the reason why it's kind of legitimate to dismiss some people who do these things, is because they do mistake the object for the deity outside of themselves. They don't see it for their own divinity. They say, no, this is the real divine, and if you don't worship my grilled cheese sandwich, then I'm going to kill you.
Yes, and maybe they're to I like trying to find connections when maybe there aren't. But there's the archetype and the cliche. The cliche is you don't get it, death to you. But the archetype is I get it. Well, can you explain it to me? I have no fucking clue. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, like in Zen, it's a thing you can't describe, right? There's no way there's no way to say it. Once you try, you destroy it. But I wouldn't go too far. I personally am not feeling the cliche archetype duality as something that holds up for very long, because without just saying that one is deeper maybe and one is more superficial, but there's some cliches that like they're cliches because they are true. Like stereotypes have there's a pattern there that people see all the time.
I'm getting lost on definitions here. I'm getting too caught up. I'm getting lost in the weeds. but really, there. Okay, what I am trying to say is that there is something as like I try to avoid, the reductionist argument of like an essence, but there is something. There's a quantum. You break it down, and then you got the quantum, right? And that's sort of the thing. And then there's all the other sort of like I can't.
How are you using the word quantum? What else would you use to use the word quantum?
To me, quantum is like if you break something down to like you can't make it any more of the essence of this thing than it could be. So, like for example, the size of something. They're talking about computer technology. Well, you can only make something so small before it doesn't even exist.
It doesn't do its thing anymore.
It's not even a thing.
Right. So you're saying and I think that's usually how quantum is used is when you reduce the scale, the physical scale so far, the rules of physics they sort of break down, and they don't work the way that they do at the scale that we're accustomed to, or Newton set them up. And sometimes they do crazy things, and so there's a sort of relativity built into the idea of quantum. Like it's both relative and chaotic and nonsensical, right? It's a place. It's a cognitive place where things can be unpredictable.
Sure, but also maybe even suggesting what is truly like the nature of something. Like this is what it is versus the manifestations of it. Like.
Okay, so you use the word essence, and I think essence is a good word, generally a good word for that. But it's also funny because essence means scent, which suggests that there's something in the olfactory understanding which is deeper and more fundamental.
Yeah. Okay.
But where are we going? What is the idea? The idea of essences, fundamentals, distilling down, sort of.
Well, breaking things down, like we can get so lost in.
You're talking about being in the weeds and having too much nomenclature, not enough.
But really, there is something, and that is the self, right?
And that is in Hinduism, that's the Atman, right? Or you brought up Doors of Perception, which I hadn't read since high school, and your prompting, I picked it up again, and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot how much this affected me.
I mean, he talks about it there, right? I mean,
he talks about suchness. Suchness is the word he uses.
Sure, sectionist.
Sectionist?
Did you say sectionist?
Suchness. Suchness. It was the thing that he identified when he was taking mescaline is the profound sort of. He was overwhelmed.
The table, or was
the fabric and the all of the painting of the flower and all of these things or the flower itself. These things were radiating a sort of beatific life that he had never quite recognized before. That these were the fundamental. It was everywhere. It was overflowing of all existence.
Yeah,
and it's sort of always there for you to notice, but only the mystics do it, or the people that pursue these substances might recognize it. But it is interesting because before I ever took anything like that stuff, I had read this book, and so it totally primed me to be thinking in that way, which is different than people who are just told to take something at a party and say, yeah, let's get fucked up.
Well, Dionysian.
I would say Dionysian uses of it are very ritualistic and in honor of a deity, in honor of a higher or a lower inner self.
But they have shit. What's the word? They've corrupted that word. Kind of
it's like bacchanal too. It's meant to be like the word, the old meaning of the word orgy. Oh,
symposium. It's the reverse. Symposium in Greek was a drinking party. Symposium now is like some academic bullshit.
Totally.
I'm serious, man.
It's a place of it's a good place of comparing notes, right?
Yeah.
And
but it used to be a Greek drinking party as a symposium.
That's right, but even that understanding is corrupted because at least if you get into Murarescu and Karl Ruck's thesis, the original symposium was not drinking as we drink. It was the wine they were drinking was psychedelically infused. And so the kinds of dialogues that were going on in a symposia were a social exploration of mind and of deeper things. And hence you could get the philosophers doing them. And the philosophical dialogues, the Socratic dialogues and all of that stuff was in the context of these spiked wines that had the pharmacon of the fields sort of mixed into them to varying degrees. And this explains, in their thesis anyway, this explains why there were some wines that could kill you, because you can't distill wine. There was no distilling, but you can't make a wine with.
There's no hard liquor.
You can't make hard liquor, so you can't get any more than like 16% alcohol.
Right. Yeah,
and
unless you're putting weird herbs in it or something.
And so that's the reason that they became deadly, is because they would have these pharmacological substances in them from the plant pharmacon, from what in the Middle Ages the witches were doing with their potions and so forth, keeping those traditions alive.
Like hemlock, the stuff that killed Socrates.
Yeah, and basically yes, obviously before the petroleum industry, all drugs were from the field. Until they started to isolate molecules and be able to recompose them so they could sell them under patent, all drugs were from the field. And so the person that tended the garden, and they knew how to help you.
I think
or hurt you.
Dude, you just gave me the best segue. So next time we're talking about drugs.
Okay.
Because really, like, our drugs, man, they're a doorway to something. Like, why?
Well, I mean, it's a very blanket term. It's a blanket and meaningless because it ranges the whole kit. There's.
You're a drug addict, right? Like, fuck.
That reminds me of something that you and Simon Prentice said, where there was this idea, you are a racist. Was this something that you guys were saying? And you were talking about innate social position and things one takes for granted and doesn't recognize privilege and all of that. In civil debate or in civil cursing, when you're going to battle with someone you are in disagreement with,
at home. And
you'll know this as a therapist, when couples are in therapy or whatever, there's one way to say things. You are an abuser.
Yeah.
That gives the other person no place to move. They have to either occupy the place of the enemy and embrace it and maybe come back at you harder, or leave the relationship altogether. But if you say, you are acting like an abuser, you are being an abuser, there's room. There's room.
Yeah.
There's room. And so when you say you are a racist, there might be real racists in the world who are just, everything to them is a matter of schism. It's white and black. And I hate those people, and I am this, and I love all the whites, and I hate those people. Might exist. They're really stupid people.
Yes.
Right? Because they have they're completely binary psyches.
A cardboard cutout.
They're binary psyches, if they exist like that. Most people are way more complex than that. Most people, of course, are mirror blind and going to be completely blind tribally to the privilege that they have and whatnot. But there are also people who grow up in privilege who recognize those things and try desperately to share with their kin all of the privileges that they take for granted. And should that work just be dismissed because they're from the privileged set? Right? And shouldn't the people saying, you are racist, you are structurally, fundamentally racist, I mean, shouldn't those people want to leave an opening for these other people? Or do we have to go to another final solution and just make all the bad people go away? Because that's where it ends up going if you use that kind of language.
100%. I've said this to my friend. She's indigenous, and she's like, well, we don't want a white savior. And I'm like, oh no, because it's talking about profound versus performative changes in society. And I was like, you can either be, do it for photo ops or do it because you believe in it. And they're talking about, white savior complex. And I was, in terms of me using the word profound. And I said, I don't know if I agree with that, because I think it is pretty profound if you're going to go against your environment to try and like your world, you're going to go against your family that thinks a certain way and try to say, hey, this is what I believe. That to me is pretty profound. Right?
Yeah, I guess it can be. The profundity, what do you, maybe that's something.
What I was kind of saying is that as you know, social change agents or whatever, somebody has once described it to me that there's profound change and there's performative change.
Oh, so like true change and superficial change.
Exactly. Like to what extent?
Real transcendence or the image of transcendence.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Holding. Yeah. So this idea, and anyways, that being lost on that, but the idea is that Sun Ra, the jazz musician, he realized that we have got to come together as a human species. Like we've got to stop doing this group, that group, this, like they want what they want, these guys want what they want. Like we've got to kind of come together. This is the next, to me, this is the next step in, you know, if we want to have a future, that we kind of got to learn how to navigate humanness. And that's that self, I think, that we can get lost behind religion, culture, identity.
Yeah, no, certainly. And we lose I mean, that's one reason why the Hindu idea of the Atman is the self, but with a capital S, and it's not the individual self. It's like you are a manifestation of the great self of everything. And if you can tap into that, it's there behind, go deep, it's there. That's sort of not dealing with the fact that the bureaucracy of Hinduism ended up creating a class society. But I wonder if in doctrine, if only the Brahmin are able to be in touch with that or not. Maybe that's the case, and that would be a poor use of those ideas, I guess. But you know, yeah, will we have a future? The funny thing is, you never have the future. The future's always right. It's like, are we there now? Are we there yet? Yeah. And but you always, do we want a present in which everyone has but so in terms of
final
getting in the weeds,
solution,
right? Yeah. And in terms of the weeds of words and different definitions and everything, I'm
a philosopher king. I'm going to tell you what we all need.
Yeah, and yeah, persuasion by coercion. But you know, it is funny when one starts to talk about terms, everyone says, "Well, that's semantics." And that's not actually the right use of that word, but they're saying let's not talk about the furniture, let's talk about our intentions with the furniture. But you kind of have to talk about the furniture of language because there is so much baggage built into them. I want to see if I can sum this up because in the pursuit of some future, you will always maybe neglect the present, right? And so the idea is maybe to make the more perfect present. I remember when I was growing up, the euphemism that we used for racists and bigots was called prejudiced. You know, you say you're prejudiced, meaning you are prejudging someone by the superficial color of their skin or the culture they come from or some affect that
out of their control.
That you are deciding in advance of knowing any depth about them, who and what they are. But now we don't use that word anymore. You know, I don't think in the woke nomenclature they talk about prejudice because the entire premise of that is about asserting prejudice. You know, the white demon, the white devil is a form of prejudice. It's not allowing the white person to have enlightenment or to be in any way awakened. Meanwhile, the term woke itself is in a past tense, so getting back to the future being some destination, you know, woke is okay. If we want to get into the silly furniture of that word, is it awakened? Once it's happened, is the process over? Do you no longer have to keep doing it? Is it merely? And I think for a lot of people, it just comes down to a dogmatic doctrine of sort of.
It's easier that way.
Well, it's easier that way, but it's tribally gratifying, and it's like we're on the good side.
Yeah.
You know, and I kind of fear that for all of the wonderful emancipation that like Me Too portends, not pretends, but portends, or the justice that can happen socially by virtue of people recognizing their privilege and sort of the woke agenda and everything, and the current, what we might call professional social emancipation of Black communities and people of color. I think like all of that conceptually is great. My concern is that image of Star Wars is in the background, and that all of these things are not created or even necessarily promoted, but they are advantageous to Darth Vader. And that the notion of human machine integration is so close around the corner that the image of emancipation is being promoted and getting people to rally behind it. And they are. And like I said before, everyone has good intentions.
Yeah.
But their good intentions might be gamed. And that what we're doing is we're emancipating oppressed people, women, and non-whites in the West as a bait and switch, because the ultimate prison lockdown, and not just a COVID lockdown, but like the digital lockdown, slavery at its most nuanced and manipulative, to be able to change your emotions and your desires and your identity without you even knowing it, being born integrated with computers and not knowing an analog world beyond that. That's my fear. And that's the reason why I think it's maybe a little dangerous. It's a little, it's bait and switch, man. Be careful not to get duped, because what you might end up with on the other side is not what you're being promised.
Have you ever heard the song "No Lives Matter" by Body Count?
Oh no, but
Ice-T, man.
Ice-T, yeah. I really liked Ice-T back then more than I do now, maybe.
Well, he released a song recently, and
did he?
Don't fall for the bait and switch. Racism is real, but not it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's great.
It's real, but there's something else going on. Like, why don't the cops pull you over in that neighborhood? Because they know you got money, and you'll sue their ass.
Or
this is what he says in the song. Anyways, hear the song. It's a good song.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna close with this, because I love this guy. Never read anything by him. You're gonna laugh when I say who it is. When you find yourself agreeing with the majority or on the side of the majority, that's a good time to pause and give yourself some self-reflection. Mark Twain.
Yeah, I don't know. That makes perfect sense.
Right? Like, so when you see yourself agreeing with the mob, yeah, that's a good time to stop and look at yourself and say, how did I get here? So many people, how did I get here? Right?
Yeah.
You were going along for the ride, man. The madness of the delusions of crowds.
Yeah, totally. So I'll then take your cue to close on this back to the weeds of language and maybe the liberating potential of gods in the old sense. You know, there's the triple goddess in Greek mythology, which is Hecate is the grandmother.
Hecate.
Demeter, some people say Demeter, is the mother. And so she's the one sort of able to produce life. And then the daughter, who's like this pubescent daughter, is Persephone. And in the old story, Persephone goes to the underworld with Hades. She gets abducted by him in a field, ostensibly by the Pharmakon. Takes her down a well, wants to marry her, and in order to keep her there, convinces her when she's sort of in awe of what's going on to eat a pomegranate. And if you eat when you're in the underworld, then you stay there and you can't return. And Hecate, I believe, goes after her and knows how to do that and goes down and negotiates with Hades to let her come up. And he agrees that she can come up once a year. And so this is the beginning of the fruiting season, right? So the winter comes and Persephone goes, and then she comes back. And so for an agrarian society, it's a really great model. I was just wondering about etymology and about the basics of the words. And Persephone, per se, which means the thing itself, and phone or phony in this sense is the voice or the sound. So Persephone is the sound itself. Demeter is dem, which is people, and meter, which is the measure. So the measure of people is the mother. The measure of people is what spawns sound, the thing itself, the voice. And the grandmother, the wisdom, Hecate, is 100, or Hecat, like Hector, like a hectare. 100. Now, 100 in that sense, in the Greek sensibility, would have been like how we would say infinity or Google, a big number.
Yeah.
Because we're in the world of statistics and of algebraic proportions and vast differences. So we need a big difference. But in Greek life, they had a sense of proportion. So things were 1 to 2, 1 to 1, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. By the time you're at 1 to 100, there's like almost no relationship between those two things.
Right.
So the name Hecate is equivalent of the masses or the ancients or the bigness, the vastness is the grandmother. And so here you can now think of Hecate, Demeter, and Persephone whenever you read a story about them or reflect on the mythology, that they're personifications of those three things. And if you're not thinking that way, you're missing the point. And I would say this is largely the case with most people who maybe not study the classics, most people who teach literature in high school.
So what are the three things?
Hecate
is the
is the many of the many, or the
many,
or right, or the totality, or the bigness, or the many,
the size,
the size, but the many, the like
the number,
like the we might, I mean, maybe we would, if we would make an analogy with life today, maybe we would say that like Hecate is the spirit, the feminine nurturing spirit of the people of the nation.
Okay.
Demeter would be the measure of the people, which would be how they see themselves through the television or through the internet, or their image in that. But also the measure of them as the courts would say how they are measured and judged. And then Persephone is the voice itself, the logos as it exists. What are we saying now? That is, and that thing, she being a feminine thing, is virgin. The utterance comes out of our mouth and it hadn't existed before. It's fresh and it doesn't know. And of course, in cancel culture, you get whipped down and be like, you little strumpet, how dare you speak without wisdom, without knowing that the audience is everyone.
Wow.
So I just thought of that this week.
I enjoy it. I'm going to reflect on that, man. I just realized we've been talking for almost 2 hours.
Oh, is it really gone on? Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
fun.
awesome.
It's
but
fun.
Now I'm like, holy shit, I got to go pick up my daughter. So,
okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. You got to run. But
no.
This has been great. This has been great. Always fun.
I so deeply appreciate it. I'm like a little kid. in terms of my attention span and my ability to focus on a certain thread. So once again, I appreciate your patience with me and your insight, because man,
Gotta
you
roll
say
with it,
things
man.
and I'm like, whoa, this guy's going places. I want to be along for the ride.
Oh, that's nice. I don't want to go anywhere, but it's good to be heard.
Hey, like I said, I just enjoy the journey. So thank you.
Yeah, totally.